Hey everyone, it's Morgan and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be painting all over my best friend's back. She had wanted me to do this for a while, and I'm sure you guys have seen like other pictures of people with crazy things painted on their backs, and I actually think it's really cool. And I was wondering how well paint would work on someone's back, because when acrylics dry, they get kind of like shiny and like a little weird, because think about like an acrylic painting, sometimes you can like chip away at it if you layer the paint weird. I don't know, acrylics are kind of strange. So when I was thinking about this, I was like, yeah, of course, I'm gonna do acrylics on her back because that's just like my go-to paint. This is what I have, this is what's going on. And they actually worked exactly the way I thought they would. When they were dry, you could see it. Like as the paint dries, it's gonna get shinier and shinier, which is actually the only downside about this video is that the light source created a little bit of a glare up in like the corner of her back, but I mean, you get the idea. So for the first layer of paint that I was putting down on her back, I wanted to put down all of the background colors because the picture we were going for was a sunset with these black big palm trees right across the top. So the first thing I was going to do is the background, obviously. So I laid down like one big layer of every color and I just kind of worked on making them all a bit of a gradient. I wasn't worried about like the gradient being perfect because I had a lot more time to go back and fix it later. And since this is layer one, I'm going to keep adding stuff on top of it. But for now, I just wanted something that looked pretty decent and, you know, got the point across down her whole back, so I had something to work with. My first layer is like kind of my framework layer. Like I lay out where everything's going to be, I get a feel for it, and then my second layer, I go back in and I go in for it for real. I started with a nice dark purple and went all the way down into a really light yellow. From the top we had purple, then we're working our way into the pinks and the light oranges and the dark oranges, and then a little bit of white for the horizon, and then some more oranges. But at the bottom, it's a completely different color from the top, and that's why I liked this reference picture so much, because it was so many colors that were just tied in so beautifully together that I was like, all right, this is the one, we gotta do this one. So going in my second layer, the first thing I pick up is my little sponge, because my next thing that I'm tackling is the clouds on top. In our reference picture, the very top of the sunset wasn't completely purple. It was mostly a pink sky, but there was these big puffy purple clouds that were overlapping with some milky pink ones. And as soon as I saw the way the clouds were, I was like, yeah, I need a sponge. There's no way my paintbrush is doing that. So for the whole thing, I first went in with purple paint on the sponge, and I just kind of dabbed around the pink areas, trying to make it like a big purple cloud. And then I would dip the sponge in a little bit of water and put it around the same area to kind of make it fan out a little bit, make it blend in a little more to the pink. Because the thing about acrylics is you can re-wet them a little bit. Once they dry, it's not the end. If you put a little bit of water on it, it'll smear a little and you can get yourself working back in on that layer. But the good news is it's not extremely easy to do that, so if I'm layering on top, it's still working with me. So for the clouds, I used a little bit of water to work in with the first layer, just a little bit, to make the two layers like marry each other a little bit. But there's only so much that my dirty paint water will do. So I also had to use a lot of pink paint and kind of mix it in with the purple on the sponge and then, you know, put more clouds all over the place. So the only reason I've talked about this silly sponge so much is because I think that it really made the piece. If I didn't have the sponge, the clouds wouldn't look as fluid as they were, and I feel like the piece just wouldn't have tied together the way it did. So if you're ever thinking about doing something like this, I highly recommend using a sponge. Highly recommend a silly little sponge. And actually, when I was done with this, my sponge like ripped and I had to throw it out. So this is the legacy of my little sponge. And as you can see, I also used it in other places. I used it right where that white horizon line is, and I used it like throughout the layers just to make sure everything was all blended together nicely. I really can't recommend this sponge anymore. Even if you get a bad one that rips to shreds when you're done, it'll still do something. So go out and get that sponge. So now that I'm on my second layer and back towards the bottom of the painting, I ended up adding all my little details in right now. This is where I added those little mountains in the back, and then I added some texture to make it look like water underneath it, because that little light orange section right underneath those mountains is a little ocean of water. Nice and pretty. It's all orangey because of the sunset. So this is where I added those little water lines. This is where I tried to blend everything out more, make those oranges work together. And every time, just when I feel like it looks good, it's done, this is the way it's supposed to be, I would always go back in and add more paint. And I'm not really sure why, but every time I just laid down another layer, I felt like it was more crisp than the last. I just couldn't stop adding to this piece because I wanted it to look as good as possible. And I was trying to get this reference picture to look just like my painting. I was trying so hard. You can even see the reference picture later on in the video because I moved my iPad underneath the camera and it's just chilling there. So if you want to compare and tell me how I did, go ahead. And then finally, once I felt like all my little details were in the right place, I finally actually liked everything the way it was. I was finally keeping everything just the way it was. I filled a plate with black paint and moved to the other side of my friend and started working on the corner with those palm trees. I started with black all the way in the bottom left corner where the palm trees came out from, and then the two of them would stretch right across the painting and kind of, I don't want to say block, but they would go right in the center, and the big puffs of trees would kind of hide some of the sky. So I wanted the sky to look so perfect behind it so that you could see that it was multiple layers. I didn't want it to look like choppy, make it seem like maybe I drew the palm tree too early. So I wanted to make sure that everything was exactly the way that I wanted it to be, because the black palm trees were the very, very last step. Once I touched that black paint to her back, I knew that there was no going back to those other details because I just didn't want it to mess up or smear anywhere, because black paint is very, very powerful, as you could imagine. So I definitely didn't want it to smear anywhere since the rest of the painting was so light and beautiful. And even though they looked the easiest, I actually think the palm trees were the hardest part of the whole painting. They were my very last step, and I was so excited to finally get to that step because I was crouching on the floor for a very long time. My legs went very numb. But I feel like not only was this the most important layer, the most important step, but it was the easiest to mess up. Because back in that little bottom left corner, that was my friend's most ticklish spot. So she was moving a lot while I was trying to draw the tree trunks of the palm trees. And no matter what I did, I just felt like my brush wasn't small enough. I had a pretty darn small brush, but in order to get like the individual bristles that were supposed to, come off of the palm tree leaves, I had to like put new paint on my paintbrush so often, because if I put too much on, it would come out all gloppy and they wouldn't look like little straight lines. But if I didn't put enough on, it wouldn't come out at all. So every time I had to have like the perfect amount of paint on the brush, and oh my goodness, was it so annoying. I worked on the palm trees way longer than I expected just because my brush just wasn't doing the job. That's the only thing I would have changed. I would have found some other way to make the little bristles on the palm trees, because those tiny details are so important. And if they were to look sloppy, I would feel like it would mess up the whole piece. So I tried really hard to make the details as small as possible, but you gotta work with me here because this paintbrush was not doing its job. Once I was done with the first palm tree and I realized how difficult it was, I didn't even want to move on to the second one. I was looking at all my brushes to try to find if I had a better one, and I just didn't. So going in on that second palm tree, I was like, all right, here we go again. We're gonna make this right. We're gonna take our time. We're gonna do this one right. But I don't really know if that one came out any better than the first one. At least from afar, you can't really notice anything. But if you looked up close, you could probably see a little bit of smears here and there because, hey, I'm not perfect. But this was a painting on her back, so unfortunately she washed it off right after, and it was pretty sad to see it go because I'm the one that murdered my own drawing. I'm the one that scrubbed it off her back, but it was nice while it lasted. And I was really proud of this piece at the end, so. This whole project required a lot of preparation and a lot of cleaning up, but I actually think it was completely worth it. My friend loved it, and she didn't have any crazy complaints besides the fact that she was laying on the ground for a long time, but we knew that from the start, so. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed it because we certainly did. So let me know if you want to see anything similar to this, and thank you all again. Bye!